Michael McKnight. What's going on, brother?
How you doing, Larry? It's been a
Dude,
while.
it has, man. It's good to see you. You want to hear a kind of a funny thought?
Yeah, of
Okay.
course.
How old are you again?
32.
Oh, geez, dude. Okay. Oh, never mind. We're not. Do you remember the show Knight Rider?
Oh yeah, of
Okay.
course.
So did you watch it at all, or were you like,
Yeah, I did.
did you?
Yeah.
Because, dude, I'm only like 2 years older than you. Um, I'm oh my God, dude. I'm actually 14 years older than you. Holy shit, dude.
14.
Anyway, so I grew up on Knight Rider. And so when I see Michael McKnight immediately, right, I'm like, Michael Knight, right?
I get that all the time.
You really?
Oh yeah.
Okay, okay, cool. And so it's good to know, even though you're 32, you're not, you would, if you would have been like, no, what's Knight Rider? I would have ended the interview and crawled into a hole and just died. So,
Well, fortunately, I have brothers that are your age, and I grew up with a lot of the stuff that they grew up with.
what are you trying to say? Your brothers are old, right? That's what you're trying to say?
I didn't say that.
I'm just
You
messing
said
with you.
that.
Right. I did say that. Yeah. No, so here's the funny thing, right? I mean, obviously everyone heard about what you're doing in the race world, which by the way is unbelievable. But also, it's like I think of Michael Knight, right? And I think of Kit, who was like far beyond like technology, right?
Yeah.
For cars back then, like the Pontiac Trans Am, that was all, you could hit like the turbo blast and
Yep.
it would do things. You'd hit like whatever he would do, he would drive fast. And now here you are, Michael McKnight, and you're well beyond. And I know you're a humble guy, but you're doing things that nobody else has done yet, which is pretty fascinating.
Well, I wouldn't say nobody else has done yet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's other people that's doing it too.
But I would venture to say not to the degree that you have with some of the records that you've broken and stuff like that, correct?
I mean, yeah, there's a couple things I've done that to my knowledge, no one else has done. But for the most part, there's a big group of crazy people that's doing the same stuff.
For sure. Okay. So see, this is where your awesome humility just it exudes. So I love it, man. Here's where I want to start though. I want to start with you growing up and
Mhm.
what that was like for you. I'm always so fascinated. I always like to start there with every guest, just because what I've noticed in the past after doing this now, after almost 900 interviews to date, we'll go over 1,000 this year. But someone's childhood and how they grew up, whether it was something that was challenging for them or whether it was something that was like, hey man, like I actually had a great childhood. My family was awesome. It perpetuates into their adult life in some way, shape, and form, and serves them and also challenges them. So fascinated to know, what was it like growing up for you?
Yeah, it was. It's a pretty broad question, but family wise, like I have one of the best families out there, and I'm sure everybody you interview says, well, I guess not everybody would say that, but for the most part, everybody loves their family and had a good childhood. My parents, I grew up on it was like a third or fourth generation dairy farm that I grew up on. And so like I was able to witness from like a young age, as far as I can remember, like my dad just working hard day in and day out, not taking vacation because the cows don't care if it's Christmas or Thanksgiving, like they need to be milked every single day. So seeing my dad like work like that throughout my childhood, and he was having to get up at 2 a.m. most mornings to go milk the cows, and then he'd come home, and if it wasn't in the middle of the summer when we were doing crops, like he would be able to go back and sleep for a couple hours and get back up and then go throughout his day. But if it was the summer when there was pipe to move and crops to take care of, then he was up at 2 a.m. and not going back to bed till 10 p.m. later that night. So I just very fortunate to grow up seeing what it was like to um, love hard work and to just have to work hard day in and day out. And my mom is one of the most humble people that you'll ever meet. She's one of those people that we don't have a lot of pictures of her because she hates having her picture taken. She hates people. I don't know how to say this without making her sound weird, but she doesn't like people looking at her. She doesn't like any kind of attention on her. So she's a very humble person, and just having them teach me the quality of life of hard work and being humble, and just kind of putting your head down and moving forward and doing work was something that really blessed me and really shaped me into who I am today. So parents were great. My siblings, though, I have the best siblings in the world, but I'm pretty sure I was an accident. The closest sibling to me is 12 years older than me. So there's a pretty big gap right there, and I'm the youngest.
Yeah,
So
buddy.
I was definitely an accident. um, but so yeah, I didn't have a lot of interaction with them growing up just because they were out of the house by the time I was like, by the time I was 6, they were all out of the house. So don't remember a lot of them with my childhood, but we're all close now, which is awesome. And yeah, grew up overweight too. I don't know if that's what
Yeah,
we're
dude.
leading the conversation to, but I grew up super overweight. Um, I think a lot of that has to do with some type of abuse that I had to deal with when I was a kid. I noticed that I started to gain weight shortly after dealing with that abuse that I went through. But yeah, super overweight, fat jokes all the time, ate like ate like junk. I had a terrible diet growing up and just no appreciation for physical activity.
So when you say overweight, like you weigh what, maybe 170 right now?
Yeah, good job.
Yeah. Oh, really? Was I right?
Yeah, I'm 171.
Okay. Because, well, I mean, obviously, you and I broke bread and hung out for quite a bit when we went to the True Transformation event where you and I were both speakers. And yeah, man, I mean, as we're, talking about, as we're on this show right now, I'm training for a show, and I finally hit back into the 170s again. And I noticed we're kind of like right around the same size. But when
Yeah.
you say you were overweight, what are we talking about here?
So age wise, when I was like 10 or 11, I was about 190.
10 or 11. Okay. And how tall were you?
Um, 5'7".
Okay. And obviously, body composition completely different than what you are now.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, so yeah, I'm 170 right now. And like I was probably like the last time I was 170 was like probably 9 or 8.
Oh my God. 9 or dude, my 8. I have an 8-year-old. He's 65 pounds. Like that's yeah, right. But he's
Dang.
tall, but he's kind of tall too. He's actually kind of, he looks bigger to everybody than 65 pounds, but he's kind of solid. But here's something that's kind of fascinating. So like you and I both share that struggle of growing up overweight. I remember, I think it was my sophomore year. That's when I topped out at like probably 225 ish, something like that. I actually wrestled heavyweight for a while. And I remember finally like losing weight and being like in the 180s, in like junior high. Right. And I haven't really deviated outside of between 180 and 190 for my entire adult life. There's only been a couple times I've tipped the scales be above 195, but I've always gotten right back down the 180s. But what I can tell you is that when I first lost weight and I wasn't doing any weight training, my body composition was very different than it is now. Right. So my body fat was definitely higher. Like you couldn't see any muscle. I still had kind of my man boobs going on, even though I was thinner. Not really any definition, just sort of like this skinny fat guy, really, kind of what I was, but I was tall. So I was like about, I'm 6'1", but that's interesting. When was it? Well, first of all, before we talk about the turning point, tell me what it was like growing up and being targeted, bullied, identified as the fat kid.
Yeah. I mean, it sucked. And I don't know if you have the similar mindset that I did, but I just tried to like lean into it and laugh about it and joke about it with everybody else.
Like in front of people though, right?
Yeah, like if people
Yeah.
make fun of my weight, like I'll join in with them and say, "Yeah, you're right, I am fat," kind of a thing. Like that
Were
was
you,
my way.
yeah, go ahead.
I say that was like my way of like trying to appear that it wasn't affecting me instead of just sitting there and just kind of like putting my head down and my tail between my legs and walking away. Like, I was like, yeah, I am. Like, yeah, I just joke with them about it and make it seem like I didn't care. I don't know if you ever had that experience when you were growing up.
Well, that's why I got really rude there and tried to jump all over what you were saying, because I got really excited because I was like, holy crap, that was me too. But then behind closed doors, I would like freaking, I would devastate myself. Like I was devastatedly hurt. Like,
Yeah.
like sometimes you'd be at school and you were just made fun of all day. Right. And you just like laugh along with them. You do what you can to cope with it. And then like, I will never forget being in 7th grade. True story. There was one day where it was just absolutely relentless. It didn't stop. And then while I was out at recess, like a bunch of the guys that were in my class, they're like, hey, like Hagner, like I was always the guy, like no one wanted me to play in the sports during recess, like the soccer or basketball, because I sucked at everything. And like one day, like they were like, we had this huge field at the school that I went to, like kind of like you could go kind of far out, and the teachers who were out at recess with us couldn't really tell what was going on. They just see a bunch of kids playing. Like, hey, Hagner, we're going to go play some soccer all the way at the other end of the field. You want to go? And of course, as the fat kid, you never get invited to play. And I'm like, yeah. And what I didn't realize is it turned into 10 to 12 guys just freaking like brutalizing me the entire recess, to where like they were calling me fat. It killed a man with the ball. They'd purposely give me the ball and just like tackle me, destroy me, get up, fat boy. I mean, like it was hard. And I remember, and then it perpetuated into the afternoon. And I literally remember coming home and I didn't want to crumble in front of my mom and the guy that she was with at the time, because I was too ashamed of how much I was made fun of that day. And I just said, hey, I got to go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. And I went into the bathroom, and I remember crying so hard that it was actually hard for me to catch my breath, because I just wanted to I didn't even want to go to school the next day. I've never actually told that story on the podcast, but I think when when you grow up heavy, you become like, you're this target, right? And then in order to cope with it, sometimes you're like, well, let me just join the fun, or let me do some self-deprecating humor, or let me just even beat you to the punch and call myself the fat before you do. And then behind closed doors, it's like mentally and emotionally like devastating, right? And here's the final thing I'll say. I'm so glad that phones and devices were not available back then, because my reprieve from being picked on was being at home. And I didn't have to deal with it. I couldn't imagine picking up my phone and it would just continue on for the rest of the evening. So yeah, I feel you on that one, man.
Well, then, like speaking of the whole phone situation, like, I watch all these TV shows nowadays about like bullying through social media, like making ridiculous videos on TikTok, and like those videos going viral. And when you're watching it, like in your head, sometimes you're like, there's no way that's happening. But, just sitting here talking to you, it's like, yeah, as mean as those people were that I grew up with, like if they had access to TikTok, like I could very well see that happening. So it's a crappy situation, but
Oh yeah.
yeah, that
Yeah.
sucks that you had to deal with that though. I don't know if I ever got to that point.
It wasn't, yeah, it wasn't often, but it was probably often enough to where it definitely hurt quite a bit. But yeah, when was the turning point for you of losing weight?
It sounds like it was similar to when it was for you, around my sophomore year. I remember, so from what I've heard, the high school setup in Utah is different than throughout the country. We have like elementary school, and then you move to a different building, and it's middle school, and that's 6th to 7th grade. And then junior high is 8th to 9th grade. And then high school is, so we have 4 different schools that we go through. And I remember at junior high, which was 8th to 9th grade, I was getting made fun of all the time. And just as my freshman year, 9th grade year was ending, I was like, holy cow, I'm going to go to high school next year, and who knows how awful those seniors are going to be to me. So I need to do something. I don't want to be made fun of anymore. And so it was between the summer of my freshman and sophomore year that I started to run a mile a day. And then this was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I started eating I think I said this at the New Jersey where we spoke together, but I started to eat the serving sizes of all the foods. with like, so like, you know,
Which is crazy, right?
yeah,
Like when you actually do it.
it's so little.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I would wake up and I'd get a cup, measure a cup of cereal, and then half a cup of milk or whatever it was. And I just like ate only the serving sizes for that whole summer. And I ended up losing about 40 pounds that summer in those 3 months. Um, and I guess now that I'm rethinking it all in my head, I guess I did. The last time I was at this weight was my sophomore year in high school. I remember I went to my sophomore year at 165. So, so yeah, I went there. A lot of people didn't recognize me, which was great. It was a good thing. For one thing, because I knew I lost a lot of weight, and then two, you know, I just kind of blended in at that point. I didn't have people targeting me anymore. So, um, so yeah, it was my sophomore year that I finally made that change.
And what did that do to your mental and emotional health?
Improved it a lot. But I don't know if you have this, like I even have this issue today still. Like I still have some body image issues.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think once you had like I think when you've been to where we've been with getting made fun of and you know being overweight, like I think we're unfortunately gonna always have some type of body issue that we're gonna have to deal with. But it sucks. So I mean, overall, my mental health improved a lot, and my emotional health improved a lot. Like I started to feel like I fit in, and I started to like, you know, when you're in high, like now it's silly, but when you're in high school, like this stuff matters. But like I started to like fit in with the cool crowd, and like, you know, people liked me. So it was an overall a much better experience. But you know, it's sad that that's what I had to do to have that better experience, like in retrospect. But yeah, everything was so much better once I lost that weight and I stopped being a target. I'm sure
Yeah,
you can
man.
relate.
I can totally relate. It's hard for me to admit this, but you know, I'm very transparent on the show, and it's hard for me to think this and say it out loud, but it's absolutely true. You know, once you've been overweight, there's always going to be that fat kid that lives within you. And not only that, but when you look in the mirror, you're always going to see him some way, shape, or form, no matter how great a shape you're in. And so I work out for two reasons. And I would say they're probably divided up into 70-30, right? I work out because 70% of me enjoys it, loves it. It's my therapy, it's my outlet. I just love, you know, pushing heavy weights around, and it just, you feel alive, you know. And plus right now I'm working out my 14-year-old, which brings me so much joy, and it gives us such good quality time. There's so many amazing things that happen, you know, even subconsciously, like when I will purposely like go to absolute total failure when I'm pushing weight just so he can spot me and feel the pride of him having to spot and pull weight off of his old man, right? Which I love doing that. And I do the same for him because I think it sends a message like, hey, we got each other here. Like we're a team in this gym, right? We've got each other's back, right? I support you. I'm here for you. 30% of me works out because I'm terrified to get out of shape again. So it's a fear motivator, you know, like that 30% is more like based on fear motivation, which I don't like to use, but it's there. And I've just accepted it for what it is. It's part of who I am. It does drive me, but it also takes away some of that joy, right? Of knowing that, hey, I'm not only here for therapeutic reasons and I enjoy the gym and all that kind of stuff, but I'm also terrified. I don't want to I don't want to be fat again, you know?
And I think if you're like me, like the area that gets really bad, is it's hard for you to take rest days. I don't know.
Totally.
Yeah, it's like everybody who wants to succeed in athletics needs rest and recovery days. But when you have that 30% of fear motivation, it's like when you get to that recovery day, it's like, oh man, like if I rest today, I might gain some weight or I might like start developing bad habits. Like things start playing in my head and it just makes it hard to like rest and recover when you should be resting and recovering.
Totally. I totally agree with that. I want to get to, you know, obviously a moment that you had. I mean, obviously getting through school and all that good stuff, but then your accident, because your accident played such a key role in your life, facing obstacles, and even what you're doing today, which by the way is fascinating.
Yeah, my accident was a pinnacle in my life for sure. um, so I was 21 years old. I was in college here at Utah State University, Northern Utah. And I kind of identified myself as a part-time student, but a full-time skier. Like I loved skiing. So every winter I would go to like part-time classes. I only did 9 credits. So I think that was three classes, if I remember right. And I made sure that Monday, Wednesday, Friday were off days, and Tuesday and Thursday were my only class days. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I was skiing. Saturday, I was skiing. It was a big part of who I was. Me and a group of friends were up at the local ski resort, and we met a girl up there. And we all were showing off, trying to win her heart, kind of a thing. We get to the terrain park, and I get to this jump that I've hit numerous times. It's a tabletop jump where, you hit the jump and then there's a gap and then there's a landing. So I used to hit that all the time, and I got there, and in my head I was like, I'm just going to hit this thing as fast as I can and see how far I can go. So instead of like carving like I normally did leading up to the jump, I just like bombed the hill and hit the jump. But as I was getting on the jump, like it's kind of funny when you get in. I don't know if you've ever had severe accidents or just like done something really stupid, but you get to this moment where like all of a sudden you have some like realization, like this is not a good idea. And like I had like a whole discussion in my head, like in a short 1 to 2 second period. And I like convinced myself, I'm like, this is not a good idea. I'm going to overshoot the landing. It's an icy day. So I panicked and I leaned back, hoping that I would like hit the ground and not go off the jump. But instead, like I leaned back as I was launching off the jump. And so like I have GoPro footage of it. I had a GoPro on my helmet this day, but it's like you could see me hit the jump, then kind of like lean back, and then all of a sudden you could just like see my skis. Like the only thing that you could see was the sky and my skis. And so I was just floating through the air, back and head was pointing downwards, and landed flat on my back way past the jump. And again, it was an icy day, so it was basically like landing on concrete. And like I instantly knew something was wrong, like the amount of pain that I was feeling in my back. And so my buddies went down to the ski patrol, got the ski patrol to come up, and they tobogganed me down to the bottom of the mountain. And by the time that I got down there, the ambulance was there. Took me to the hospital. I had some x-rays taken, and doctor told me that I shattered my L1 vertebrae. And he told me to consider myself lucky because the way I landed and the way that my vertebrae compressed, it fractured 100% outward away from my spinal column. So he said, like, if I just like twist my back a little or just landed a little bit differently and it compressed inward, then it would have paralyzed me. So, that was a super fortunate situation for me that I didn't paralyze myself. But he told me that we're going to have surgery. So the next day we went in and they did surgery on me and put in 2 rods along my spine and then 9 screws in my vertebrae and the vertebrae surrounding the one that I ruptured. And then they took out part of my hip bone and fused it to my spine. And so it was a pretty crappy experience. Excuse me. But yeah, so the doctor told me that at this point, I just started to start running again. It was about 6 months before I started running again, and I started to like have fun with it and love it. And I had a goal to walk onto the track team at Utah State, the university I was at. And so one of the first things I asked my doctor after the surgery is when I could start running again. And he told me that it would be at least a year before I would even consider running again. He said that, I could get out and walk a mile a day just to help with my physical therapy. He said walking a mile a day is going to help you heal really quickly, or not really quickly, but it's going to help you heal faster than it would if you don't. So he told me to walk a mile a day. He told me that I should probably drop out of college for the year, that I would just need to like stay in bed and watch TV all day, basically. So I dropped out of college. I moved my classes like a full year away. I had a job that I just started about a week or 2 before I broke my back. So I lost that job when they found out I would just they had no idea when I'd be back. I had no idea when I'd be back. Moved in with my parents. So it was just kind of a crappy situation. It was my first year at college. I was pretty pissed off because I was just getting into dating. I was getting into like Utah State is a party school. So there's just like a ton of stuff to do here. And the fact that I couldn't do that anymore was very upsetting. It was really hard for me to be grateful that I didn't paralyze myself. I focused 100% on all the other crap. But long story short, I started running again about 3.5 weeks after my surgery. And yeah, it was
Can I just interject here real quick?
Yeah, of course.
There's a couple of things I just want the audience to know right now. So I used to be in medical device sales before doing Dad Edge full time, and I was in, spine surgery. So I saw constantly every day, I saw these fusions that you had, right? People with traumatic injuries, or sometimes it was old age due to osteoporotic fractures and that kind of thing, or whatever it is. But I saw these things every single day. What I can tell you is, in the audience, is that the fact that your L1 blew out and it went lateral and it didn't go towards the spinal cord. Like, listen, God had a hand in that one, my friend, right? And you already know that. And because I know you're a very spiritual person, but I'm just completely blown away that with that type of impact, that the vertebrae went lateral and anterior and not towards the spinal cord. So that's number one. Number two, I've never known any patient in my entire medical device career, which, by the way, I did it for 15 years, to get back to running more or less, even, walking right, in 3 weeks. Like, that is mind blowing.
I don't know what to say to that.
I mean, like, dude, like, what was it? I mean, did you feel pain when you started running again? I mean, were you just like, screw it, I feel pain, but I'm just going to do it anyway? Or what was your mentality, and what was the physical response that your body had?
So, I mean, I guess it's not good to do long story short with this story because you gloss over a few things. But like my doctor told me, he told me to walk a mile a day. And so I had one of those, my friends called it my Ninja Turtle shell. It's like it went from basically just above my pecs to below my belly button. And it was this brace that they formed, like, according to my body. They came in and poured, is it plastic? You probably know what I'm talking about.
We used to call it the clam.
The clam, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we call it. I don't even think that's the real term, but we, the medical device reps, we used to call it the clam. Like, hey, go get them the clam brace, because it's kind of like a clam, like, right? It holds you together.
Yeah, you get the Velcro and you like cinch it really tight. So yeah, I had one of those, and I borrowed my grandma's walker, and out, like I said, I grew up on a dairy farm, so it was in the middle of nowhere. And by my parents' house, there was this road that like no cars drove on. It led to the cemetery where I grew up. It was pretty remote. So I'd go out, get the walker, and I'd walk that road. So the doctor told me to walk a mile a day, but I ended up doing 2 miles, just because I had nothing else to do. So that 2 mile road, it took me about an hour and a half the first time that I walked it. Like, it hurt quite a bit, but I kind of like, I think this is where I realized I had like the mindset so at this time I didn't know what ultra running was. But like, in retrospect, like, I can see like little things that I started to do that kind of like, I'm realizing I had the mindset of like the mindset you need to run ultra marathons. Like, I had that in this moment because like I started trying to like increase my time for that 2 mile section. So, I did an hour and a half, and I was like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to try to do it in an hour and 20 minutes. And I ended up doing it in like an hour and 10. So I was like, okay, let's go for 45 minutes. And then I remember trying to ditch the walker, and I got my grandma's cane, and I did it with the cane, that next little step. And that didn't feel too shabby. So I got rid of the cane, and I just started walking without the walker and without the cane. So I did all this in like a week and a half time frame. And so after about a week and a half, I started to just say, okay, well, let's see if I can do 3 miles today. So I walked for 3 miles. The pain didn't like get any worse. So about 2.5 to just before I started running, so 3 weeks, 2.5 to 3 weeks post surgery, I was walking 6 miles a day. No pain, nothing was changing. So So in my head, I was like, okay, like if I can walk 6 miles a day, maybe I can run for half a mile. So I remember like at the start of that 3-week period, I tried to go for a half mile run. Um, and like leading up to it, like I was terrified because my doctor told me to wait a year. It was 3.5 weeks later. So I had no idea what was going to happen to me. So I started running, and like the best way that I can describe how it felt, like I didn't feel additional pain, but like I could just feel how vulnerable my back was. Like it felt super heavy. I don't know if that has to do with like the hardware that was put in me, or a combination of a couple of different things, but my back felt super heavy. Like I really had to just work on my form, make sure that I was keeping my posture right, just to make sure that I wasn't doing anything to hurt it. But after that half mile, like, I monitored how I felt the rest of the day, and things didn't get worse. I went to sleep that night and woke up the next day and things felt the same. So I went for another half mile run and it felt fine. So I just kind of like in the way I did with the walking distances, I just kind of started running a little bit more each day. And about 6 weeks post surgery, there was a 10K that Utah State was putting on. So I signed up for it. I was like, what the heck, let's try it. So I ran this 10K 6 weeks post surgery. I ran it with my clamshell on. And I did it in, it was 48 minutes. I remember it was 48 minutes. So like it wasn't blazing, but I mean, for breaking my back 6 weeks earlier, like I was super proud that I was able to do that. And it was about 2 weeks after that, I finally ditched the clamshell and just started running without it. And by about 3 months or so post surgery, I was running 5 to 10 miles a day, having no issues.
Were people around you like, dude, what are you doing? Or was your doctor like, Michael, come on, man?
So the funny thing is my doctor has no idea that I was doing this to
Oh,
this.
so you kept it from
Yeah, I kept it from him.
him.
And like like whenever I do a podcast and talk about this, like at the end of the podcast, I'm like, I'm gonna go find him and just tell him like how good he did like how good of a surgery he did,
Yeah.
and just like say, hey, this is what happened to me. I don't know if you remember me, but like I think you and I talked about this in New Jersey, but I don't know if you know the story of Dr. Death or not.
I don't think so.
His name's Christopher Dunch. They did a story on him. He was a neurosurgeon in Texas, and he was responsible for like either killing or mangling over 30 people.
Yeah, we did talk about that. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that's freaky. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard the podcast about him, and I just watched the documentary they did on him a few months ago, and like seeing that story, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful that my doctor knew what he was doing. And like that's kind of the thing that's making me want to go thank him, because I realize that not all doctors are great.
Yeah, that's actually an understatement. Where I have and obviously we won't get into it, but I have got so many stories of absolute just things happen in the OR that you're just like, I can't believe that happens. So I think a lot of people believe like, oh, well, if I'm if this doctor's taking care of me, I am totally in good hands. Like I have nothing to worry about. It's not all docs are created equal. It's just like being a carpenter. You have people that finish last in your class. Okay. And here's the crazy thing. And this is just my experience. There's probably no statistics to ever back anything like this up. But the what I noticed was a common theme is the more rude a surgeon was with his bedside manner, the more gifted he was in the operating room.
Really?
Yeah. And then sometimes it wasn't always the case. I mean, there were actually there were great surgeons who were actually great at both. There were some surgeons that had great bedside manner, and then you see them in the OR and you're like, oh, I would not send anybody to you for surgery. Right. I mean, it's not to say that they do a bad job, but they're not as skilled as others. Right.
Right.
Because you have to have, I mean, in order to even do that, you have to maintain, a surgical success rate. It has to be good patient outcomes is what they call it. Right.
Right.
But that's great. It sounds like you were definitely in good hands.
Yeah, I was. So yeah, I never let him know. My parents were obviously pretty upset because They're the ones that paid for everything. So, I mean, with like, they had reason to be upset. They didn't want me to ruin things and make things worse. And,
Sure.
but yeah, all my college roommates and friends were just like blown away that I was doing that. And like, it's kind of funny because I remember like I was the only one out of my friends that liked running. And so when they saw that I signed up for this 10K, like there's a bunch of them that signed up too, because they're like, okay, if our crippled friend can sign up to do a 10K, I guess we
Our
can too.
crippled friend.
But yeah, we have a good friendship where we can make fun of each other
Oh
and
my
laugh
God.
about it. But yeah, they made fun of me. All like, this is this is probably a little bit too much information, but whatever, who cares? I remember too, like one of the hardest things for me to do was to sit down on the toilet. Like that hurt my
Yep.
back so much.
Yeah, that's your L1. I
Yeah.
mean, it's higher in the spine than obviously the sacrum, but when you sit down like that L1, that's your largest lumbar level vertebrae, right? Which is they're larger in width and diameter and everything from the thoracic spine. So it's the first vertebrae to start taking that initial shock of when we stand, when we sit,
Yeah.
even when we jump, it's the first vertebrae to kind of be the foundational vertebrae. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it was difficult. And like I was being dramatic about it, but every time I'd sit down, I'd like let out this like loud, like, ah, like kind of scream. And so like my roommates and my friends just loved making fun of me for that. Like after I'd do that and sit down, I could hear them all upstairs and they'd start making that noise back at me. So we could definitely joke about it and laugh about it. But yeah, so everybody was just kind of blown away and slightly afraid that I was going to set myself back a little bit, but um, you know, nothing was happening. So like after a few weeks, they finally just kind of accepted it, and we're all just super grateful that I was able to recover that fast.
Absolutely. And then for you, these things didn't stop at a 10K though. You
Right.
you really ratcheted up the intensity and what you started doing.
Yeah. So I mean, I always tell people that breaking my back is what led me to where I'm at today. I mean, obviously, we're never going to know where our paths would have taken us if like something different happened. So if I didn't break my back, who knows where I'd be today, and who knows if I would or wouldn't have found the world of ultra running. But the way my story goes, I lost my job for breaking my back. About 4 months after breaking my back, I finally got another job. And it was at that job that I met a local trail runner to the area. And at the time, I didn't know that trail running was a thing. Back then, it was pretty like it's definitely picking up nowadays, and it's pretty popular, and most people know trail running exists. But then it wasn't that popular still. So I met this trail runner. He was telling me that he was training for a 50-mile race in the area, and I didn't know that anything over a marathon existed. I thought the marathon is what everybody trained to get to. So he told me he's training for a 50, and I was just like blown away. And he's like, yeah, I'm actually doing a 100-miler later this year as well. And yeah, like I looked at him that way too, like no idea that that kind of distance existed. And that particular 100-mile that he was training for, it was local, and it started where we live. And if you're not from here, it's hard for you to comprehend the massiveness of this course. But like it went through the mountains that we live in, and just went all the way over into Idaho, basically. Like when he described that course to me, I was just like blown away that there was people running 100 miles from Logan, Utah to Bear Lake in Idaho through the mountains. Like it blew my mind. And so he kept inviting me to train with him, and I kept turning him down because it was intimidating. It scared me, but he just caught me on a good day, and I finally said, okay, I'll go on a run with you and see what it's like. So he took me on a trail run, and I just like instantly fell in love with it. Like for anybody that has done a trail run versus a road run, like running on trail is so much better. And so I just instantly fell in love with it. Signed up for my first ultra, which ended up being a year and 3 months after breaking my back. So roughly the time frame that I was supposed to start running again was my first ultra, which is always fun to think about. Had a great experience, and then just kind of went all in ever since. And, it's been 10 years now, and I've done 50 ultras, and I plan to do tons more. I love it.
And again, you're a very humble guy. Okay. But I want you, I want to give you time and space here. And I want you to, for lack of a better word, brag on yourself a little bit, because I want you to talk about some of the things you've done in the running world. Now, we know your story all the way up until now. Former fat kid, right? Picked on, that kind of thing. Obstacles there, headspace, that messes with us quite a bit. Then, you lose weight, you start, you go off to college, you're skiing, you have this freak accident, which, by the way, breaking, having what's called a hairline fracture or a compound fracture in your back is extremely painful, but actually breaking your back or shattering a vertebrae is absolutely devastating to somebody's overall health, for potentially years to come. You're the anomaly, right? That you've gone in this direction, but you not only came from that type of background and then got into ultra running, but now you are, for lack of a better word, you're doing extremely well in the ultra running space, and especially within these 100, these 200, which I didn't even know existed, and these 240-mile races. Like, are you kidding me? Like 200, I don't even like to drive 240 miles. You're running these things, or, you're completing them, but you're doing them faster than anybody has to date with some of these, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So talk to us about that. And again, I know you're very, very humble. I want you to just step into, not obviously, because I think it's impossible for Mike to be cocky in any way, but I would just love some color and some description around what is it you have achieved in the running world.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you want to interrupt me or stop me, go ahead, because I can talk forever about some of the races that I've had the opportunity to compete in. But so I started doing, I did my first 100 in 2014. So about a year and a half after my first ultra, and I just fell in love with that distance. So I started doing.
I did my first 100 and I just fell in love with running miles. Said nobody ever. I'm kidding, but dude, that's crazy. Okay, keep going.
So yeah, I fell in love with the distance, started doing a lot of 100-mile races. And then in 2016, I learned of the 200-mile distance. And I was like you, I didn't the 100-mile distance was like the stopping point. That's why I just kept doing hundreds, because that was the furthest and I loved it the most. So I learned of these 200-mile races. And at the time, there was two 200-mile races called the Bigfoot 200 and the Tahoe 200. They were the most popular, and they're part of a series called the Double Crown of 200s. And so there was like a small group of people that would sign up and do both of these races in the same calendar year. And they just happened to be 30 days apart too. One was August 10th, and then the other is September 10th. So I signed up for Bigfoot 200. And so this was about a year after me and my wife got married. We were very poor, the typical newlywed still in college kind of story. And so, and these 200-mile races, they cost like $1,500 to do. They're not cheap. And that's not factoring in like the gas to get there, the hotels and all that stuff. So I signed up for the Bigfoot 200 and reached out to the race director and was like, hey, I want to do the Double Crown, but I need to save up for the next one. So just know that I'm putting my foot out there and I'm going to do both of them. I just can't pay for both yet. And it was like a week after that, she announces this new race that she's making called the Moab 240, which is going to be a part of the Double Crown series. So it's now going to be a Triple Crown. Moab 240 was October 10th. And so now it's 3 200-mile races in the span of 60 days. And so when she made that announcement, I was just like, oh, there's like 2 200s. That was kind of a push. There's no way I'm doing 3 200s in that kind of time frame. So I reached that back out and I was like, hey, never mind. I'm just going to do the Bigfoot 200, maybe another year. So I do the Bigfoot 200. I had a terrible experience. It was awful. I almost quit multiple times, but my wife, I can honestly say I wouldn't have finished like 80% of my races if it wasn't for her talking me out of quitting. And so she talked me out of quitting. I ended up finishing the Bigfoot 200. And it's funny, like if you know any ultra marathoners, the phrase like, I hate running, I'm never going to do this again. Like it's not uncommon for you to hear an ultra marathoner say that. And so I said that all the time. And my wife was just like, yeah, right, kind of a thing. You're going to sign up for another race again. But like I convinced everybody that I was done with running after this 200. Like mentally, I was just so pissed off at how bad it went. And so I convinced everybody I was done running for a while. But about a week after finishing that 200, I was talking to my coach at the time, and we were just like talking about all the issues that I was having. And he basically had an answer for every issue that I had. He's like, well, maybe if you did this, this would like, you wouldn't have had this issue. And so he gave me all these answers. And like, after talking to him, I was like, it's like, well, shoot, if I address all those problems, how good can I do at the 200-mile distance? And so I ended up signing up for the other 200s later that night. And so I ended up entering myself into the Triple Crown that night. And, you know, before I knew it, I was done running, but I had another 200 to prepare for in another 3 weeks. And so I went to that 200. I addressed the issues that we went over, but I ended up having a ton of other issues at that race. I ended up walking more than half of it. Like I had severe IT band pain and it was just impossible to run, but I finished. And then I went into the Moab 240 and my AT band issues resolved. But when I got to about mile 200, I got a stress fracture in my shin and I ended up having to walk that final 40 miles. And so despite all,
I just want to make sure everybody heard that real quick. You're talking about it like it's any other thing. I had a stress fracture at mile 200, but I walked the extra 40. I walked the 40 miles to finish. Most of the people listening to the show has never walked 40 miles at a time, and definitely not on a stress fracture like that. That is mind blowing.
I mean, what are you going to do? You've done the other two races. You're done 200 miles of the third race. It's like, I wasn't going to quit. So, you know, if that was the only race I had done that year, then there's a good chance I would have quit. But it's like, I've come so far, like I had to walk to finish it.
Real quick though, there was a moment, and I can't remember which race it was, but I remember this from when you were speaking, that there was one of the races you did and you literally like took off your number at one of the checkpoints and you're like, yeah, I'm done. And then you decided to not quit, go get your number again and finish. So which race was that? Tell that story as well.
That was the Tahoe 200. So that was the race before Moab. That was the race I had the IT band issues and I walked for half of it. I got to mile, it was like 120 or 130. And like the IT band pain was just like so severe. And like, I was just like, this is the only time that my wife didn't try to talk me out of it, because she could see how bad I was limping and she could see how much pain I was in. And it, like, there comes a point in ultra running where like you don't want to quit, but like the majority of the reasons you end up quitting ends up being mental. But there are times when in this situation where it was like very physical and you don't want to like injure yourself and put yourself out for a long time. So I was worried about that, and my wife didn't try to talk me out of it. So yeah, I took my bib off. I gave it to the aid station. Me and my wife, we had our firstborn child 4 months before this race, and I could do a whole podcast talking about my wife, because she came out and crewed me for this race while breastfeeding our 4-month-old son, taking care of a newborn baby. So I quit. I got in the car. My wife was feeding our son. And while she was feeding him, thankfully at this aid station, I had service and I took my phone out of airplane mode, and like my phone just like blew up with like texts of support from friends and family. And so as I was reading through all those texts, I was like, that's kind of what changed my mindset. And I was like, okay, I have less than 100 miles to go. Maybe I can go to the next aid station and just see if things get a little bit better. And so I got out of the car, I went to the aid station, asked for my bib, they gave it back to me. And I started walking, and it was about halfway between that aid station and the next aid station that my IT band pain alleviated a little bit. And so I was able to run for the next 40 or 50 miles. And then it came back, and, at that point I was at like mile 180. So I was able to walk the final 20 and reel it in. But yeah, that was that race. It was a bad experience.
So there's a couple of things that really jump out at me as far as like us just listening to you in the audience, right? Me included. I get to have a front row seat listening to you again. And a big theme of what you're talking about here is everybody can relate at a point in their life. Sometimes it's a daily, man, right? As a father, where you're like, I just don't know if I can do any more today. Yeah. Like there's a part of me that just wants to wave the white flag. Not that we're leaving our family, right? Not that we're leaving our marriage or anything like that, but we're just like, I just don't know how much more I can give today, right? I'm burnt out. I'm overwhelmed. I'm a bit fried. And then there was that moment where you opened up your phone and you found support, right? Men. And what I can tell you is, men in our mastermind, when men are supported, magical, amazing things can happen. It's the drink of water when you're walking through the desert that keeps you going. So that's number one. You had support. The second thing was this. From what I can tell from how you described this race, your goal was to get to the next checkpoint, not to finish the race necessarily. Like maybe if I get to the next checkpoint, I'll see how I feel. So you had a short-term goal that hopefully you got to the long-term, but it wasn't necessarily to go knock out the next, 100 or 70 miles or whatever you had left. It was to get to the next checkpoint. So that's a skill, right? Because men are very extreme beings. We are either all in or we are all out. We're not going to, it's kind of like, I'm not going to go get my car out of the garage and drive to the grocery store unless I can go 90. So if I can't go 90, I'm just not going to leave. Or it's like, I'm not going to go to the gym unless I can spend my hour and a half there. If I can only spend 45 minutes there, what's the point? Yeah. So, but there is a point. And, I want to know, how has a mentality like that served you in other areas of your life?
In other areas?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, the majority of my life is running right now. So it's kind of.
But you're a dad?
Yeah, I'm a dad.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate though, because, and I say this as you can probably hear my daughter still screaming in the background, but I have really good kids. Like I have a really good kid. So I've been fortunate where like there's not a lot of days where I've felt like that with my kids, where like throwing in the white flag. And I sometimes wish that I had those days so I could relate a little bit more, but like I said, my kids have been so good. So I don't know how to answer that question, to be honest with you.
Maybe there's a different question here. How about that?
Okay.
I think the different question is this. So you it doesn't surprise me that you have good kids. I don't know you that well, but you come across to me as this person who's very steady. In other words, how you present yourself to others, how maybe even your mindset is. You come across as maybe you're one of those people, and you and I sat next to each other at dinner, that you feel very comfortable with talking to about anything, right? And that's a skill. I mean, we call that skill creating an environment of psychological safety. I don't know if your running has anything to do with your personality and just being able to hold space, or being able to be calm in the midst of chaos, or being that the fact that you've experienced so many mental obstacles and so much adversity that, to quote David Goggins, your mind has been calloused very, very well, to where, like, if you're faced with adversity, you're kind of like, yeah, it's nothing worse than I face all the time, especially doing these races. Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty accurate.
Okay, there you go. So I would say maybe through that question, maybe that is how you're able to be mentally and emotionally resilient, even if you're triggered, or maybe it doesn't really feel like there are many obstacles because you've overcome so many already.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I mean, when you talk about all that, I do realize that I am fortunate to have running to help me with that, because I mean, obviously like my life's not perfect, like things do happen. And I can think that there have been times when I'm just like super frustrated about something with work or just anything. And like, I've just learned that before I react to that frustration, like all I need to do is go throw on my running shoes and go for like a 30-minute run or something like that. And then when I come back, I'm like a lot more calm.
Wait, you
Um,
do those? I just figured it'd be like a 30-hour run.
30 I wish I had time to just go run all day.
Like 30 minutes is like kindergarten recess for you, I think.
But it's enough to
Yeah.
reset my mind a little bit. So
I
so
think
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say that's so important. And I want to make sure all the men heard that we have to have this element in our life where when I need to fill my cup or when I need self-care, that's so important. And so many men will sidestep that in their life because of out of guilt or time or perspective. So guilt be like, well, I can't do that for myself. That's selfish. Or like, I just don't have the time. Or, it's like, well, I'm a dad now. So my perspective is dads don't do that stuff. Dads need to do that stuff. We say this all the time, but men need to be operating at 100% because your kids don't want the burnt out, overwhelmed, non-fulfilled father in their life. What they truly, even if it's less time, they want less time with higher quality time. Because if we are filled, if we are fulfilled, if we're less stressed, if we're less overwhelmed, and that comes with self-care, we're going to show up better for the people that we love most. And we're going to selflessly serve in a more powerful way.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds very important.
It is, hey, in the last few minutes of the show here, I want to get to two more topics here. Number one, I want to end the show with what you're doing in the adoption world, because we have a lot of men who listen to the show who are maybe considering adoption or have adopted. We haven't really broached this topic too much, but before we get to that, I want to make sure these guys know, you've done some things in the running world. You've broken some records. You're leading the charge on a few things here. And I just want you to share some of those accomplishments.
Yeah. So I guess the build up to those 200s that I was talking about, once I finished those, like I realized that a lot went wrong. And so I started developing plans to address the things that went wrong. I started strength training, which was something I never did. But through my studying, I learned that runners, basically they focus on a couple muscles when they're running and then not all the other muscles, and they can develop muscle imbalances, which lead to injury. So I started strength training to address those muscle imbalances. And then I started to clean up my diet a little bit because a lot of the issues I had were gut related issues. And so once I got confident that I had those issues addressed, I signed up for those 200s again because I wanted to go back and try and beat my times since I knew I walked so much of it. And so it was 2 years later, 2019, I signed up for those 200s, and I just went in there with like one focus, and that was to beat my overall combined time, which was 205 hours between those three races. And I went into each of those races with that one goal in mind. And the outcome of that was I actually ended up winning each race in the series. And I set records at each race in the series, like course records, the fastest time ran on the courses. And I ended up beating my time by about 40 hours. But
40 hours. We're not even talking minutes here. We're talking hours.
Yeah. I improved by about 10 to 20 hours at each race that year when I came back. It was crazy. And my goal was to improve by like 5 hours at each race. And I just kind of blew my own mind out of the water at the end of those races. So became the first person to win all three of those races in the same calendar year. After that, I don't want to go too much into this because I can talk about this forever, but the diet changes that I made as I started to take a low carb approach, because I found myself running into these issues where I would either lose energy because I wasn't eating enough, or I would be puking because I was eating too much. And so it was this vicious cycle. And the low carb approach, from what I studied, said that I could eat less and still have sufficient energy because I'm teaching my body to be efficient at fat burning. And so that was kind of like the fix all for my two problems. So I started doing that low carb approach, and I started like seeing my speed improve. I started seeing that I didn't have any gut issues. And I noticed that I started to like just kind of run without eating. And I didn't plan that. That just kind of happened. And so through all that, I started to wonder like, well, shoot, how far can I run just relying on my fat storage? And so I set out in 2020 to see if I could run 100 miles without eating any calories and just drinking water and electrolytes, like the raw potassium, magnesium, and sodium electrolytes. And so I went out and did that. And my goal was just to like do it to see if I could do it. But I actually ended up doing it was like my second or third best 100-mile time while doing it. So I was able to do it fairly quick. And I've done that twice now because I wanted to make sure it wasn't just a fluke. I wanted to see if I could do it 2 times. So I became the first person to like, I don't even know if this is something to brag about because so many people think it's just stupid from a nutritional standpoint, but the first person to run 100 miles without eating any calories. And then this is probably my proudest achievement, but there's a trail in Colorado that goes from Durango to Denver, and it's 485 miles, and it's all above 10,000. Well, it's like 95% above 10,000 feet. So it's a very, very high altitude trail. And part of like the ultra running world, there's a term called FKT, which means fastest known time. And there's just hundreds of trails around the world that runners will go to and try to set FKTs on, try and set speed records. And so I went to the Colorado Trail. The current record at that time was 8 days and 7 hours. And I went out to try to beat that. And I ended up doing it in 7 days and 13 hours. So I almost took a whole day off of that record, but that was probably my greatest achievement. I was proud of that one.
That's unreal, man. I don't even remember if you talked about that at the speaking event, but that one doesn't sound familiar. But if I missed it the first time, but the second time is that I've been at 10,000 plus feet when we've climbed 14ers, and that's no joke, man. Like people get altitude sickness at 10,000 feet or even a little bit below that. So the fact that you are running 400 miles plus at that altitude is unbelievable to me.
It was rough. I thought I live at 5,000 feet. So I thought that I was going to like carry over, but no, I had like headaches. I was puking a lot. Like the first 3 days of that attempt, I was experiencing some altitude sickness. And then it just kind of like leveled out, and I was able to just truck forward and get to Denver. The crazy thing about that story, though, I always have to throw this out there. Like, I had a bag of about 12 pairs of shoes, and I grew up. I live in northern Utah. I live in a very safe community. Like, don't lock your doors, leave your garage open, kind of a thing. So I got to Durango, and I just threw this bag of shoes in the bed of my truck. And I had a crew with me, and your crew, like, for this, they drove to every 20 to 30 miles, like the trail intersected a highway or something. And so they were able to go to those spots and like refuel me and stuff like that. So we got to mile 20, and I was just about to go up to a really high pass where there was snow. And so I wanted to get some shoes that had like a built-in gator around it to keep the water out. So I asked my crew to go get those shoes, and we come to find out that someone stole my shoes the night before I started the attempt. And so I went from having access to like 12 pairs of shoes that I had broken into to having my crew go to a local running store and buying me 3 pairs of brand new shoes. And so I basically had to do that whole thing wearing brand new shoes and breaking new shoes in, which really sucked.
Dude, that is crazy.
Yeah, it sucked.
That is absolutely crazy. In my mind, like I find myself quite speechless because doing these interviews, like, people bring things up and you kind of know the next question. I'm sitting here thinking like, my God, like I've never even heard anything like this. How much did you sleep during these 7 days?
Yeah, so I would say that sleep is my weakness and my strength. Like for this 500-mile trail, it was kind of like the border of not needing to sleep that much, where if I did anything further, I would have had to sleep. But I'm not a good sleeper. So that's where it becomes my weakness, because if I want to do anything longer, I got to figure out how to sleep. But because I'm not a good sleeper for these, like, quote unquote, shorter distances in the grand scheme of things, like there's tons of trails that are a lot longer than this. But I'm able to just kind of push through and not sleep that much. And so between those 7 days, I ended up sleeping. It was just a little bit over 5 hours total. So it was about
Total.
total. It was about 45 minutes a night.
Are you kidding me right now, dude? I don't even think you're human anymore. I seriously think like you're like, like the freaking Terminator or something. Like you were born, like you were made in like the year 2040, like by Cyberdyne Systems and sent back in time to run. Like it's just crazy.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, man.
it
Well,
was hard.
he, I think we already nailed some of the things that are going on here, but like, men are faced with adversity constantly. We're faced with challenges. We're faced with obstacles. Obviously, we could obviously project what you're doing as self-care, but we could also project what you're doing as you're constantly testing yourself. You're constantly actually manufacturing adversity through your running that makes you more gritty, and you're probably able to take on what we would call high points of adversity in our lives. But people like yourself, like, I've interviewed Navy SEALs and special operators and those types of things. And those types of individuals are able to um, define stress and obstacles just a bit different. And then they kind of know what to do with them because they've been trained to do so. Like like I said, as Goggins would say, his mind has been calloused. Like, it's like, okay, yeah, there's that. Oh, there's that. Here's what I do. Oh yeah, I can overcome that. I've done this. I can go overcome that. So I think one of the main themes here is, number one, gentlemen, take care of yourselves, right? Number one, but also don't be afraid to test ourselves, to get ourselves out of our comfort zone and whatever that looks like for us. Because when we manufacture some adversity in our life, it's going to have a compound effect. It's going to have this trickle effect into other areas of our lives to where, where things might feel like we're overwhelmed or stressed out. We can take on those stressors easier if we are constantly leveling up who we are and testing ourselves. I personally love, I don't do anything to the extreme that you do. But like for instance, we just got done, me and my 15-year-old, we did what's called the Squire event, which is a rite of passage for father and son. It's 15 hours of physical, mental, and emotional testing. But you walk away from that being like, wow, I didn't really know I could do that. And then those types of lessons show up when we're faced with just normal everyday adversity. And you're like, oh yeah, yeah, I see you. I know what you're doing. Like, I get that. Like, I've been through something like that. And now I know a little bit more. I know a thing or two more. It's really helpful. Before we jump out of here, I want you to talk about how you're serving. Not that you don't have enough on your plate, but how you're serving. You have a nonprofit in the adoption world. I think it's a wonderful thing. I want to make sure that the men out there know, not only are you an amazing individual in the running world, fatherhood, and all that good stuff, but also like for men who are in the adoption world, and looking at those avenues to bring home another child or just even support what you're doing. But share what it is what you're doing.
Yeah, so in 2017, my sister, she adopted a little girl from Colombia who has Down syndrome. And I learned of an organization called Racing for Orphans with Down syndrome. And so like the cost of adoption is pretty high. And Racing for Orphans with Down syndrome, or RODS for short, they fund adoptions, or they help fund partially adoptions. And so they wrote my sister the final check that she needed to be able to bring this, Maggie is her name, bring her home. And so learning about them, I ended up getting involved with them just because of how much our lives have changed having Maggie in our family. She's an absolute joy to be around. I don't know how many people have been around an individual who has Down syndrome, but they're the life of the party, basically. And so, Racing for Orphans with Down syndrome, we've raised money to help these kids come home and find their forever families. And right now, we've done some research, and right now there's 491 children who are like adoption eligible around the world, and they just need a family to step forward to adopt them. And we have thousands of dollars to hand out in adoption grants. We just need families to step forward. So if there's anybody out there that is into adoption or knows a family that is into adoption, we would love to talk to them and give them the resources and some of the money that they need to help bring these kids home.
That's so cool, man. You're doing some really, really fantastic things in the world. Is this your full-time gig of what you do? What do you do for a living?
So yeah, I professional runner, so I get paid for that. And then I also coach. Currently, I'm coaching about 50 athletes. And then this nonprofit, doing a little bit of work with them. Those are the three things that I have to fulfill my days, aside from being a father.
Wow, man. That's just, how many hours of sleep do you log a night? You said you're not a good sleeper. It's a gift and a curse.
Yeah. So like I'll get in bed like with the intent of sleeping for 8 hours, but I'm usually only end up getting about 6 with how much I wake up throughout the night. So I'm getting about 6 hours a night, even though I get in bed and I'm in bed for 8 to 9 hours.
I mean, if I can log 6 hours, like I feel like it's a successful night myself.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Plenty
Yeah.
of
I mean,
complaining.
well, no, I mean, I just, I I have issues here and there with sleep. It like kind of comes and goes. Overall, I would say, 80% of the time I can sleep okay, but then there are just crazy times where I just don't for some reason, just too many things rattling in my mind. But yeah, no, I love it. We're going to have all the links in the show notes for our guys who want to go connect with you. And by the way, if there's any guys out there who want, if you want to reach out with Mike, I mean, as far as like, how do you view that as far as like just men reaching out to you if guys are interested in hearing more about the adoption thing, or even like, if they want help with running?
Yeah, so they can message me on Instagram, but I also have a website that has like a contact form on it, and that contact form goes to my email. So if they have any questions or need any kind of advice, they could just reach me from that.
Cool. We will have it in the show notes. So gentlemen, not to worry. We're going to have all of Mike's links in the show notes. If you go to thedadedge.com/Friday44 for this podcast, again, thedadedge.com/Friday44. Mike, as we send off here, what is one final thing that you want to share with the men out there? Just something that has helped you in your life, in your marriage, and fatherhood.
Oh, being 32, I always feel like I don't have the right to say some advice for this kind of stuff. But in the short time that I have been a father and been a husband, like I'd say one of the greatest things that I've learned is just the willingness to involve your family with what you do in your day to day. And I guess to like broaden that into what I'm talking about, like I see a lot of people who are so caught up in their work, caught up in their own personal hobbies and activities, and like in a way kind of become selfish without realizing it. And their family kind of gets put on the dresser, and they're just kind of there when they need them. But I've just been so happy and fortunate to be able to like be in a position where I can include them in my day. I can include them in my passions and my hobbies, and find that balance in my life to be able to put my passions and hobbies aside and get involved in their passions and hobbies. So I guess like the overall encompassing theme that I'm trying to say is to find balance in what you're doing as a father and as a husband and as a worker and all of that. Don't get so caught up in everything that you're doing and get so self-focused that you forget about your family, and find that balance. And yeah.
That is powerful, my friend. And that is absolutely true. So yeah, find your balance, man. Make sure you're taking care of your mental, emotional, physical, spiritual health. Your family will thank you for it. Even if you don't make yourself a priority, I guarantee your family will tell you, go make yourself a bit of a priority so you can show up more powerfully for them. Again, guys, go to thedadedge.com/Friday44 for all of our show notes, for everything. If you want to get in contact with Mike, we'll have everything for him there. Mike, thanks so much for coming on today. This was awesome.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I love chatting with you.
Back at you, my friend. Gentlemen, go out, live legendary. Take care.